Watch where you walk, girl. The white socialite's shrill voice sliced through the music as she jerked the tray from the black waitress's hands. Red wine exploded across the silver tablecloth and splattered the waitress's white uniform. Dark streaks spreading like blood on snow. Laughter rippled through the elegant crowd. Chandeliers glimmered above, violins still playing, but the room had already gone cold. The Boston Grand Hyatt glittered with people who believed the world revolved around their last name. Business moguls, senators' wives, charity influencers, all pretending to care about causes they'd never touch outside a ballroom. In the middle of that golden lies stood Keisha, 24, graceful, her natural curls tied in a neat bun. She had picked up this extra shift to cover her mother's hospital bill, not to be a public target for humiliation. The woman who drenched her, Madison Hartwell, smiled with the smug calm of someone used to applause. Her diamond necklace sparkled under the chandelier. "Oh, dear," she said, feigning concern. "I hope you people know how to handle accidents." Keisha froze, every eye turning her way. Dozens of champagne flutes paused midair. Her brown skin gleamed under the golden light, the red stain blooming like a wound across her chest. The band kept playing. The humiliation kept burning. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am," Keisha said quietly, kneeling to collect the shards of the broken glass. Her voice was calm, trained, respectful, but steady in a way that made Madison frown. "I'll have this cleaned right away." "Oh, don't worry about it," Madison announced loudly enough for half the hall to hear. "I'm sure accidents happen often when the staff isn't fully trained." The line landed like a slap. A few guests lowered their eyes. Others smirked behind their glasses. Keisha's hands trembled only for a second before she steadied them. She'd learned long ago, dignity was the best revenge. At the head table, a man in a tailored black tuxedo lifted his gaze from his wine glass. Robert Hartwell, Madison's husband, had seen it all. He didn't move, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. Keisha stood and walked toward the kitchen, the wet fabric clinging to her skin. The scent of wine mixed with perfume and shame. In the corridor, she stopped for a breath. This was supposed to be her last night as a waitress before graduation. One more shift, one more paycheck. She had survived worse than this. Long nights on Chicago's South Side, 3 jobs while studying economics, professors who doubted she belonged in Harvard's MBA program. Tonight would not break her. Inside the kitchen, she grabbed a towel, dabbed the red stain, and forced a small smile to the other server staring at her. "All good," she said. "Accidents happen." But it wasn't an accident. It never was when someone like Madison was involved, a woman who saw kindness as weakness and wealth as proof of worth. Back in the ballroom, Madison was basking in attention, retelling the scene like it was a comedy sketch. She looked at me like I'd stolen her crown. "I swear, these people are getting bolder every year." The table of socialites laughed. One of them whispered, "You should see if she even speaks proper English." Robert's hand tightened around his fork until his knuckles whitened. 23 years of marriage had taught him that his wife's charm is something uglier than vanity. Keisha returned quietly, her uniform replaced, posture straight. When she leaned to serve champagne at the next table, her eyes met Robert's for a single heartbeat. Something in his look, pity mixed with respect, told her he had understood everything. The music swelled again, but the air had changed. Some guests avoided eye contact. Others watched the waitress as if she were invisible. Madison pretended not to notice, her laughter sharper, louder, desperate to cover her own unease. Keisha finished a round, then moved toward the corner, where empty trays stacked beside silver ice buckets. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the mirrored wall. Red stain faintly visible, chin lifted high. She exhaled slowly, whispering to herself, "Not yet, not here." Because what Madison didn't know was that Keisha had come prepared. Her phone, tucked deep in her apron pocket, was recording everything. Audio crisp, every insult perfectly captured. Tonight's humiliation would not end on the floor of a ballroom. It would echo far beyond it. Part 2, almost equals 650 words. Ready to voiceover format. No extra lines or filler. The music from the ballroom faded as Keisha stepped into the corridor again. The noise behind the doors became a blur of laughter and clinking glasses. She stood by the service counter, watching the red stain on her apron dry into something darker. Her breathing slowed. This wasn't the first time she had felt small in a rich room, but it would be the last time she walked away without using what she knew. She pulled out her phone, checked the waveform on the recording app. Perfect. Every word Madison had spat was clear. She smiled faintly, then slipped the phone back into her pocket. The head waiter appeared, whispering, "You okay, Keisha?" "Yeah," she said. "Just a spill. Happens all the time." He sighed, guilt in his eyes. "I saw what she did. Don't let it get to you." "I won't," Keisha replied softly. People show who they really are when they think no one's watching. When she re-entered the ballroom, her steps were measured, her expression calm. No one knew that the quiet waitress weaving through their crystal tables carried both humiliation and evidence. Robert Hartwell's gaze followed her. He didn't know her name yet, but he saw a kind of grace that money couldn't teach. His wife was still surrounded by admirers, laughing at her own cruelty, pretending the whole scene was harmless gossip. "Madison," he murmured under his breath, "you never learn." Keisha approached a new table of guests, refilling glasses, pretending not to feel the weight of 100 eyes. She overheard one woman whisper, "Poor thing, but maybe she shouldn't be here at these events. They never fit in." The words hit like stones, but Keisha didn't flinch. She set a glass down gently and straightened her posture. Her heart beat steady, the rhythm of someone who had fought too hard to break now. She thought of her mother, who cleaned offices for decades to keep food on the table, of her younger brothers, both in college because she had managed their tuition from her scholarships, and of the professors who still raised eyebrows when she spoke in boardrooms full of white men. All of that strength was inside her now, steadying her hands as she worked. The violin solo changed to something slower, elegant. The light dimmed slightly for the next speech. Madison turned toward the stage, smiling proudly as her husband stood to thank the donors. Robert's voice was smooth, confident, practiced, but underneath there was tension. "As we celebrate generosity tonight," he said, "let's remember that true class is not measured by how we treat our equals, but by how we treat those who serve us." Madison's smile faltered. For a split second, she felt the jab behind the words. Keisha caught it too, her lips pressed together, almost a smile. The crowd applauded, unaware of the undercurrent flowing through the hall. Later, in the kitchen, Keisha leaned against the counter, sipping water. Her co-worker, Tiana, nudged her elbow. "Girl, what happened out there? I saw that wine fly like a scene from a movie." Keisha exhaled, half laughing. Rich woman needed an audience. Guess I gave her one. "You didn't say anything?" "Not yet." Tiana studied her. "You're planning something, aren't you?" Keisha looked at her reflection in the metal fridge door. "I'm just not done learning from people who think I'm beneath them." The announcement bell chimed, dessert service. Keisha picked up a new tray, posture perfect, face unreadable. Back in the ballroom, she approached Madison's table again. The laughter stopped as she placed new glasses down. Madison's lips curled slightly, pretending politeness. "Try not to spill this time," she said, her tone sweetly poisonous. Keisha met her eyes, calm and clear. "Don't worry, ma'am. I never make the same mistake twice." Madison blinked, unsettled. The waitress wasn't supposed to talk like that, or look her in the eye like an equal. Across the room, Robert caught the exchange. His interest sharpened. He wasn't watching his wife anymore. He was watching Keisha. For the first time that night, the balance had shifted. Madison didn't know it yet, but she had already lost control of her own stage. Part 3, almost equals 750 words. Ready to voiceover / cinematic pacing / no extra lines. Includes hook 2. The night moved on, but tension clung to the ballroom like thick perfume. Every clink of silverware sounded sharper. Every laugh just a little too loud. Keisha worked quietly, moving between tables, her calm presence unsettling Madison more than open defiance ever could. Madison refilled her own glass, pretending not to notice the curious looks from other guests. Inside, her irritation simmered. How dare a waitress keep her head high after being humiliated? She needed to crush that dignity, publicly, elegantly, so everyone would remember who held the power here. "Margaret, darling," she whispered to the woman beside her, "watch this." Keisha approached to replace a bottle of champagne. Madison turned, voice smooth as silk, but sharp as glass. "Dear, could you come here a moment?" Keisha stopped beside her table. "Yes, ma'am." Madison smiled for the audience. "Tell me, do you read French? Or is that not part of the training here?" Several guests turned their heads. The band kept playing, but conversation thinned into silence. Madison held out a menu, her red nails gleaming. "Be a dear and read tonight's courses for our table." Out loud. We wouldn't want anyone confused about what's being served to our guests. Hook 2. Power shift hook for a heartbeat. The air froze. Then Keisha took the menu, her hand steady. Her eyes met Madison's, calm, direct, dangerous in their silence. "With pleasure, ma'am." She began to read. Amuse-bouche de foie gras à la truffe noire. Suivi d'un filet de bar rôti avec serve poivre sauce. Each word flowed perfectly, accent flawless, rhythm confident. The French rolled off her tongue like music, echoing across the hall. Gasps rippled through the tables. Madison's smile cracked. Margaret blinked, wide-eyed. Even the violinist missed a note. Keisha finished the list effortlessly and handed the menu back with a polite smile. "I hope that was clear enough, ma'am." Silence. Then a few quiet claps from one corner of the room. Someone whispered, "She's incredible." Madison's face drained of color. The humiliation she'd intended had turned on her like a mirror. Robert Hartwell rose slowly from his chair at the head table. His voice carried just enough to reach every ear. "Impressive. It seems our staff are far more educated than some of our guests realize." A faint chuckle spread through the crowd. Madison's hand trembled around her glass. Keisha stepped back, nodding respectfully, and returned to her post. The sound of applause faded into a thick, embarrassed quiet. Madison's perfect world had cracked in front of her peers. Robert's eyes followed Keisha as she walked away, not with pity, but with genuine respect. Minutes later, in the hallway outside, Keisha leaned against the marble wall and exhaled slowly. Her pulse was steady again, but her mind raced. The look on Madison's face would stay with her forever, the moment arrogance met truth. Tiana joined her, eyes wide. "Girl, that was... I don't even have words. Where did you learn that accent?" "2-year exchange in Lyon," Keisha said, smiling faintly. "Scholarship." Tiana laughed under her breath. "She picked the wrong one tonight." "Yeah," Keisha said softly, "and she doesn't even know how wrong yet." She touched the phone in her pocket. Still recording. Every insult, every gasp, every apology yet to come. The file will be gold for her thesis on racial microaggressions in corporate settings. But this wasn't just academic anymore. It was personal justice building in real time. Back in the ballroom, Madison sat rigid in her chair. Margaret whispered, "Maybe we misjudged her." Madison's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous." A trick accent doesn't change where she belongs. But the tremor in her hand betrayed her panic. Around them, polite smiles of judgment. Whispers had turned into quiet condemnation. Robert leaned toward her. Maybe tonight's not the night to lecture anyone about belonging. Madison said nothing. She simply stared at the untouched dessert, realizing that the woman she tried to embarrass had become the evening's unspoken centerpiece. Keisha cleared the final plates, every movement deliberate, her composure intact. Inside, though, her mind was already shifting from endurance to action. The recording would expose everything, not through shouting or revenge, but through undeniable truth. As the event wound down, the strings softened, guests began leaving. Keisha caught Robert's glance again, respectful, curious, questioning. She gave a polite nod and disappeared toward the service corridor, leaving Madison frozen in her chair, face burning beneath the crystal lights. Tonight, the mask of high society had cracked, and Keisha was just getting started. Part 4, almost equal 700 words. The gala finally ended. leaving behind a scent of roses, spilled champagne, and bruised pride. Waiters folded tablecloths in silence as the guests trickled out, heels clicking over marble, laughter forced and hollow. Madison Hartwell had vanished to save face, her mask of charm shattered somewhere between humiliation and disbelief. Keisha stayed behind to stack glasses, pretending not to feel the dozens of glances that still followed her. Pity from some, admiration from others. She didn't need either. What she needed was focus. The phone in her pocket still blinked red. The entire night was safe, recorded, preserved. A low voice startled her. "Miss?" She turned. Robert Hartwell stood a few feet away, his tuxedo jacket draped over his arm. He looked nothing like the arrogant husbands she had seen at events like this. His expression was weighed down, not with superiority, but with shame. "Mr. Hartwell," she said politely, straightening. "If you're looking for your wife, I'm not," he interrupted softly. "I wanted to speak with you." Keisha froze for a moment, uncertain. Then she nodded toward a quiet corner of the hall. He followed her there, away from the last remaining staff. Robert hesitated before speaking, his voice low. "I owe you an apology. What my wife did tonight was unforgivable. I don't have the right words, but I needed you to hear that from me." Keisha studied him. 24 years of her life had trained her to tell the difference between pity and respect. What she saw now was genuine remorse. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's choices, sir," she said calmly. "I do," he replied, "because I watched it happen and I said nothing." The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. "You noticed everything," she said. He nodded. "I noticed your composure, your French, your patience under fire. That wasn't training, that was character." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Robert asked quietly, "You're not really a waitress, are you?" A faint smile touched Keisha's lips. "Not exactly. I'm finishing my MBA at Harvard. My thesis is on systemic discrimination in corporate culture. Waitressing helps with tuition." Robert's eyes widened slightly. "Harvard," he repeated, half in disbelief. "Good God. People see what they expect to see," she said. "Sometimes that's a lesson they need." Robert exhaled, running a hand through his gray hair. "Then maybe you're the person my company needs." She frowned. "Excuse me? My firm's been under pressure to address diversity issues for years. But it's all talk, no action. We need someone who understands the data and the reality. Someone like you. You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a consulting contract," he said. "Independent. You'll have full freedom to investigate, analyze, and report directly to the board. Paid at your level, not theirs." Keisha blinked, caught between disbelief and quiet satisfaction. "Why me?" Robert looked her in the eye. "Because I've lived too long surrounded by people like my wife. Because I'm tired of silence. And because tonight, you taught this entire room what real dignity looks like." For the first time that evening, Keisha let herself smile. Not the polite service smile, but something real. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell," she said. "But I don't do favors. I do accountability. That's exactly what I'm hoping for." They exchanged a firm handshake, two people on opposite sides of privilege meeting halfway, connected by something rare, integrity. Robert slipped a card from his wallet and placed it on the table. "Call me tomorrow morning. My assistant will arrange the details." Then he turned to leave, pausing only to say, "You shouldn't have had to prove yourself tonight, but I'm glad you did." As his footsteps faded, Keisha looked down at the card. Hartwell Development, Executive Office. She could almost feel the shift in the air, power quietly changing hands. CTA 1, After Hook 2 sequence, an emotional reveal. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Keisha exhaled slowly, folding the card between her fingers. The world had just flipped upside down, and Madison didn't even know it yet. The humiliation that was meant to break her had just opened a door she never expected. She slipped her phone back into her apron and whispered, "Lesson 1, never underestimate the quiet ones." Outside, snow began to fall over Boston, soft and clean, erasing the night stains one flake at a time. Part 5. almost equals 750 words. The next morning, Boston's winter sun filtered through a thin gray haze. Inside a penthouse suite overlooking the harbor, Madison Hartwell sat at her vanity, scrolling through her phone with trembling fingers. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the waitress's calm smile, that quiet confidence that had stolen the room. Her reflection looked different now. The flawless makeup couldn't hide the fear settling beneath her skin. Harvard, she muttered to herself, repeating the word like a curse. She thinks one night makes her my equal. Robert's voice drifted from the doorway. She doesn't think that, Madison. She proved it. Madison spun around. You're still defending her? I'm defending decency, he said simply. Something you lost somewhere between your wine glass and your pride. Her lips tightened. You embarrass me in front of our guests. No, he said. You embarrass yourself. And I'm tired of cleaning up after your cruelty. Robert turned and left before she could answer. Madison's perfectly manicured hands clenched around her phone. For the first time in years, she realized her husband wasn't on her side. The balance she'd enjoyed, status, influence, control, was slipping. Across town, Keisha sat in a cozy cafe near Harvard Square, laptop open, earphones in. The soft of a morning chatter filled the air. Her cursor blinked over a new document titled Case Study, Racial Microaggressions in Elite Social Environments. She pressed play on her phone. Madison's voice filled her ears, dripping venom. I imagine accidents are common when you hire this kind of people. You can read, can't you? Each line was crystal clear. Keisha listened without emotion, just precision. She marked timestamps, annotated reactions, and wrote, Power displayed through public humiliation, documented evidence. The project that had started as research was now a weapon. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. This is Keisha. Good morning, came Robert's voice. I hope you're still willing to consider my offer. Keisha smiled faintly. I am. When do we start? Tomorrow, he said. Our HR director will send the contract today. And Keisha, yes? Whatever happened last night, it won't be forgotten. Not by me. She paused, sensing the weight of his tone. Good, because I didn't record it to be forgotten. That evening, as the city lights flickered on, Madison met with her closest friend, Margaret Wellington, at an upscale lounge. She spoke in hushed, desperate tones. Robert's losing his mind. He's actually hiring her. A waitress. Margaret sipped a martini. Darling, if the girl really is from Harvard, it could be good par. Diversity looks modern now. Madison stared. You think I care about PR? She humiliated me in front of everyone. Margaret gave a nervous laugh. Then make sure she never does again. The idea lingered, heavy and poisonous. Meanwhile, Keisha prepared her presentation materials for Hartwell development. Charts, surveys, policy drafts, all clean and professional. But beneath the academic tone lay something deeper, justice structured in data. As she worked, Tiana called. Girl, are you really meeting that man's company tomorrow? Yes, Keisha replied, smiling at the thought. He wants an audit on discrimination policies. Be careful, Tiana warned. Rich people love redemption stories, as long as they stay in control. Keisha looked at her reflection in the cafe window. Then I'll make sure they don't. That same night, Madison sat in her car outside Robert's office building, the engine idling. Through the glass, she could see him talking with a woman in a dark coat. Keisha, confident and self-assured, holding a folder. Madison's jaw tightened. So that's how it is. She grabbed her phone and started recording from the window. The footage was shaky and meaningless, but gave her a false sense of control. Let her step into my world, she whispered. I'll make sure she regrets it. Inside, Robert handed Keisha a pen. Once you sign, you'll have access to everything you need. Internal reports, staff data, department logs. Keisha skimmed the pages. And complete autonomy? Complete, he confirmed. She signed, the pen gliding smoothly. Then let's begin. Outside, Madison's car lights flickered off. She drove into the cold night, planning her next move, a woman who had always lived above consequences now about to meet them head-on. Inside the office, Robert watched Keisha gather her notes. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first saw you last night, I thought you'd walk away. Most people would have." Keisha looked up. Walking away never changed anything. He smiled faintly. "Then maybe you're exactly who we need." As the clock struck midnight, the office lights dimmed. Keisha stood by the window, watching snow drift over the city skyline. She whispered to herself, "The higher they build their walls, the louder the truth will sound when they fall." Part 6 almost equals 850 words. 3 weeks later, Boston woke beneath a gray sky and breaking headlines. Hook 3. Bold promise hook. Business executive caught on audio humiliating a black waitress. Recording exposes Boston elite. The words scrolled across every screen in the city. News anchors repeated Madison Hartwell's name like it was a warning. Her voice, icy, arrogant, unmistakable, echoed through radio stations and social feeds. "You can read, can't you? People like you don't belong here." Each phrase hit like a hammer. Keisha listened from her apartment, earbuds in, coffee untouched. She didn't post a file. She'd only shared it with Robert and her university mentor for her thesis submission. But someone in the board office must have leaked it. Now it was everywhere. Her phone vibrated nonstop. Reporters, classmates, professors, activists. Every message carried the same tone, outrage and admiration. She stared out the window at the frozen Charles River and whispered, "Let the truth speak for itself." Across town, Madison's phone exploded with notifications. Viral audio exposes racist socialite. Hartwell wife under fire. Her reflection on the vanity blurred behind tears. The empire she built on image was collapsing in real time. "Robert," she screamed, storming into the kitchen. He sat calmly at the counter, reading the newspaper, the same one splashed with her disgrace. "You have to stop this," she said, voice breaking. "Call the editors, the lawyers, anyone." Robert didn't look up. "You recorded it, Madison. You lived it. There's nothing to stop." She trembled. "That girl is destroying us." He folded the paper neatly. "No, you destroyed yourself." She just press record. Madison's eyes filled with disbelief. "You're defending her again?" Robert's tone stayed calm, almost tired. "I'm defending what's right. And as of yesterday, she works for me." Her breath caught. "You hired her." "She started yesterday. Director of Diversity and Inclusion." Madison's world spun. "You can't be serious." "I'm done choosing silence," he said simply. "You taught me what happens when I do." By mid-morning, the story had reached national outlets. Talk shows debated privilege, racism, and social accountability. Keisha's name trended as the Harvard waitress. Strangers called her brave, powerful, inspiring. She refused interviews. The story wasn't about fame. It was about proof. At the Hartwell Development Headquarters, Robert walked Keisha through the glass-walled offices now buzzing with tension. Employees whispered when they saw her, half guilt, half respect. He stopped near a large conference room. "This is your team now," he said. Keisha set her briefcase down, projecting calm authority. "Let's begin with culture audits, pay gap data, and anonymous staff surveys. No spin, no PR cleanup. Real numbers." Robert nodded. "You'll have everything you need." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you." She smiled slightly. "Save that for the results, Mr. Hartwell." At home, Madison tried calling everyone she knew, social club board, charity circles, family friends. All declined to answer. Her online followers dropped by the thousands. Comments under her last photo read like verdicts. Privilege with poison. Now she knows what humiliation feels like. Justice served. Her closest ally, Margaret, finally picked up. "Darling, I can't be seen supporting you right now. The foundation revoked my chair position this morning. I'm sorry." Madison's voice cracked. "Margaret, please." The call ended. Silence filled the room like punishment. She sank into her chair, face in her hands, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt like a cage. Later that week, Keisha stood before the Hartwell board. Screens displayed charts of inequality within the company. "Discrimination doesn't begin with words," she said steadily. "It begins with systems built to protect those words. We're changing that, starting now." Her tone was confident and professional, but the fire behind it came from somewhere deeper. The same fire that had burned through humiliation, through years of quiet endurance. The board members nodded. One of them whispered, "She's remarkable." Robert met her eyes from across the table, pride unspoken but clear. That evening, a journalist caught up with Robert outside the building. "Mr. Hartwell, any comment on the viral recording?" He paused, looking directly into the camera. "Yes, my company stands for accountability. The woman in that recording reminded us what it means." The clip spread quickly, reinforcing the narrative: justice, dignity, change. Madison watched the interview from her living room, wrapped in a robe, eyes hollow. Her husband's words echoed in the empty space. She looked around. The house that once hosted senators and socialites now silent except for the tick of the clock. Her phone lit up again, but not with friends. It was her lawyer. The board had called an emergency meeting. Her volunteer titles were revoked. Even the tennis club expelled her. Every privilege she thought untouchable was gone. She stared at her own reflection in the mirror. Who am I now? No answer. Only silence. The same silence she had once demanded from others. Meanwhile, Keisha finished her first week at the firm. Late at night, alone in her office, she looked over the city skyline. Snow fell lightly against the windows. She replayed Madison's words one last time, then hit delete. The file was gone, but the lesson remained. She whispered to herself, "Justice isn't loud, it's steady." Her reflection in the glass looked stronger, older somehow. Not a waitress, not a victim, but a woman who turned humiliation into change. Part 7, almost equals 650 words. 6 months later, spring sunlight warmed the Harvard courtyard. Laughter echoed as students in black robes adjusted their caps and took pictures with proud families. On the main stage, a banner read, "Harvard Business School, Class of the Year." Among the rows sat Keisha Washington, posture straight, eyes glimmering with quiet pride. The red stain that once marked her uniform was long gone, replaced by the crimson sash of distinction across her graduation gown. The dean stepped up to the microphone. "Our next speaker represents the strength that comes from resilience and integrity. Please welcome Keisha Washington." Applause swelled. She walked to the podium, every step calm and sure, the weight of the past months steady behind her. She began softly, her voice reaching across the open air. "A while ago, someone tried to humiliate me in a room full of people who thought I didn't belong there. But what they didn't realize was that every insult, every doubt, was teaching me how to stand taller." The audience fell silent. "I learned that success isn't about proving them wrong," she continued. "It's about proving to yourself that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered." Camera flashes blinked. Somewhere in the crowd, Robert Hartwell stood quietly among other guests, hands clasped, a faint, proud smile on his face. He didn't approach her after the ceremony. He didn't need to. She already knew he was there, the one man from that night who had chosen to listen. Across town, Madison Hartwell sat alone in her enormous but empty mansion. Dust collected where parties used to sparkle. The headlines had faded, but the internet never forgets. Her charity boards, social clubs, and sponsors had all vanished. Even her stylist had stopped returning calls. On the coffee table lay a newspaper article. From waitress to director, the woman who changed corporate America. Keisha's smiling face glowed from the photo, poised, strong, free. Madison picked up the paper, hands trembling. She whispered, "It was just one night, just one mistake." But the truth was heavier. It wasn't one night. It was a lifetime of entitlement finally catching up. She stood, looking at her reflection in the tall mirror. For years, that reflection had been her entire world. Now, it looked like a stranger, hollow, frightened, human. A single tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time, Madison didn't hide from it. Later that week at Hartwell Development, Keisha wrapped up her meeting with the HR team. The final report lay open. Discrimination policy reformed. Approved. She closed her laptop and smiled. Change wasn't instant, but it was happening. One policy, one conversation, one truth at a time. Robert entered the room quietly. "You did it," he said. "We did," Keisha replied. He extended his hand. "You reminded us what leadership is supposed to look like." She shook his hand firmly. Leadership doesn't start with power. It starts with conscience. That evening, Keisha walked along the Charles River, breeze lifting her hair. City lights shimmered over the water. She thought about her mother, her brothers, the night she cried over textbooks and bills, and that one evening when humiliation tried to crush her. Instead, it had built her. She whispered to herself, "You can take everything from a person, except the truth." Her phone buzzed, a message from Robert. Board-approved scholarship program for minority students. We named it the Washington Initiative. Keisha smiled, tears bright in her eyes. The circle had closed. Justice was a revenge. It was legacy. She turned back toward the skyline, the city alive with possibility. Her final words, soft but resolute, carried into the night. Never let hate decide who you become. Final CTA. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.